Welcome to the Inside Out Money Podcast.
Can't even recognize this place. Too many pieces of our past mistakes.
Hi, I'm Maggie, and I believe real change starts from the inside out. So let's work together to improve our money and our lives from the inside out. We will explore all things money and our relationship with it. Join me each week with a rotating set of co-hosts, friends, and interviews. Let's jump in.
It's time, we going round and round and round and
Okay, hey
round
everyone.
and round.
This is our second interview ever on Inside Out Money. People once requested this guest on Friends on Fire, many times actually, and I never made it happen. This guest was very hard to book, hard to find. And I was a little bit inspired by StoryCorps. Wait, I'll bring the person on, then I'll ask if they know what StoryCorps is. This guest is my mom. Hey, Mom.
Hi, Maggie.
How are you?
I'm good.
Are you excited to be here?
I am.
Is this the first podcast you've ever been on?
Yes, it is.
Are you familiar with StoryCorps?
Yes, I am.
And you've listened to some of them?
Just a very, very few, but I do know what it's about. I know
Okay.
how it works.
It's NPR.
Yes.
And they created these booths and they put them in different places and they encouraged people to come and I'm sure there were all sorts of people, but there were often people interviewing older people, like their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents about just really interesting things. And I just always, the older I get, the more I want to document things for posterity. I have a terrible memory personally. So I'm excited to have you on here for many reasons.
Thank you.
And again, you've been requested. And we're going to have a conversation about money and family. And I want to learn more about how you grew up financially. I think we've probably had bits and pieces of these conversations before, but never in a really focused,
All in one place.
yes, way, packaged up all together way. So let's jump in. I'm going to give you a chance at the end to ask me any questions, just in case you have any burning ones that come up based on my probing questions of you today. Okay, why don't you start and just kind of introduce yourself? Tell us your name other than Maggie's mom, your age, and just, whatever you'd like to share.
My name is Susan. I am 75. I'm very, very proud to be Maggie's mother.
Oh, thanks.
In fact, in the past, when I have listened to podcasts, and I have not listened to all of them, but I have listened to quite a few, I'm always kind of tickled when I hear her make some remark about her mom or her dad or how she handled money growing up.
Okay. I forgot you were 75. I knew you were 70-something. I just couldn't remember the exact year. So let's start with, tell me a bit about how you grew up. Where was it? What siblings? Just a little bit about that. And then we'll get into the financial piece, but just to set the stage for us.
I grew up in the 1950s and 1960s. So I'm right smack in the middle of the 20th century. I am the oldest of 4 children. We were very close in age. So I'm the oldest, and my youngest sister is just 5 years younger. We were very middle class. I remember some families had a little more, some families had a little less, but just felt very, very average in the area where I lived. I don't know, as a young person, that I was very conscious about the world situation. And of course, worldwide, we're considered very, very privileged.
Yeah.
But I felt we were right smack in the middle class.
So it's interesting you mentioned middle class. This wasn't a planned question, but Liz and I were discussing middle class lately of everybody sort of thinks they're middle class. Even I often describe my current lifestyle as middle class. It's not. It's definitely upper middle class or something. I don't know what to call it exactly. But I have a question for you. So compare how you grew up to how we grew up. So when not you now, but when I was a kid versus when you were a kid, were they the same levels of middle class, or do you think you had more or less at some?
Exactly the same.
Okay.
My childhood and your childhood, exactly the same. When I grew up, my dad did not have a college education. My mother did have a college education. What is probably the most interesting thing about my growing up in the 1950s and 1960s was that my mother worked full time. That was very unusual for a married mother to have a full-time job. But my father changed jobs frequently, so my mother knew that she's the one who had to have an extra income and keep
like a
everything.
stable income.
Exactly. I suspect that my mother also handled the finances in our household.
Okay, well, on the middle class comparison real quick, if you then compare, how you grew up to how I grew up to how your grandkids are growing up.
Maybe each generation has gotten slightly a little bit better off. As a child, I can remember the things that I didn't have, and I think you had perhaps a little more. And I look at the 3 granddaughters and I feel like they've got even more.
Yeah, I would have said much more even. but it's all perspective. And I think some of it is I know like what they have and what we could afford to give them versus what we choose to give them through trying to be very intentional about how much they have and trying to teach them certain things around consumerism and having less and all of that. Okay, a question for you. Can you share your earliest money memory or lesson that you think influenced you?
Absolutely. My grandmother always on my birthday in January gave me a $5 bill. And I would save and keep that $5 bill until I went to summer camp when I would spend it. So I learned to save. Another early memory is my house was about 6 houses away from a little tiny village shop or little tiny general store. I would get a nickel and I would walk down to the little shop. I would hand them the nickel and make them give me back 5 pennies so I could see these 5 pennies. I would spend 1 or 2 pennies on a little piece of candy and I would have my 3 pennies that I saved. So I learned early to save. In the 50s and 60s, we didn't have credit. We didn't have credit cards.
Well, you probably wouldn't have had it as a kid anyways, but yeah.
But our parents, if you needed a refrigerator or a washer and dryer, you saved that money before you bought it.
Yeah.
I think houses were financed. I'm not sure about cars.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, just that much less was financed. Did someone tell you to save that $5 for camp?
I don't think so.
So you just sort of knew?
I knew that I needed money in the summertime and
that you weren't going to get it. Like no one was going to just hand you another $5 at camp. So
exactly.
You needed to.
Well, I knew that I needed to have savings. I think savings was an early lesson.
But do you think that was actively taught to you, or do you think you picked it up by realizing if I want to spend money, I'm going to need to?
Well, there also wasn't the opportunities. I mean, I wasn't going to stores. There wasn't the advertising. There really wasn't. Other than the little store where you could spend a nickel, there really wasn't any other place to spend money as a 10-year-old.
Yeah. What else about your upbringing or your family values do you feel like shaped your approach to money and how you learned to manage it at a young age? Like, did your mom actively talk to you about money and teach you things about money, or did you just pick it up subconsciously through watching her actions?
I don't know that there was much talk about money. I think it was just observing that you always had savings.
Hey, an interesting thing about that $5 that your grandma would give you, Alex, who is my brother, gives his nieces $100 for their birthday. So it's funny that, that $5 is turned into $100. And if you don't get $100, it would be very typical, you might get $50. So that's, 10, 20 times inflation on the birthday money there.
In 1970, when I graduated college, somebody gave me $100. That was awesome.
Like a lot of money.
That was, oh my goodness, that was an amazing... That would be like somebody giving you $1,000 today.
Yeah. I remember Aunt Suzanne used to give us $100 for our birthday when we were kids. And I thought that was a lot of money. She was very wealthy compared to us, I believed, at least.
She was.
And so I thought that was a lot of money as a kid. Okay, when you were growing up, did you feel like you had enough money?
Always enough. We lived in the same house for that 20-year period that I was a child. We had stability, security, the same neighborhood, the same friends, the same schools. I think that's really, really important to children.
Just for that sense of stability.
Yes. Yeah.
Security.
I can remember twice. These are 2 cute little tiny stories when I wanted something and my mother wouldn't buy it, wouldn't spend the money on it. Do you want to hear the stories?
Yeah.
One was a 4th of July parade, and I wanted her to buy me an American flag. Now, there's 4 kids who probably all want her to buy something, and she wouldn't buy me the American flag.
Do you remember what the flag cost?
Maybe 50 cents, but maybe not. Maybe 25 cents. But we came home and she gave me a piece of white fabric and crayons and told me to make my own flag, which of course I did. And we found a dowel to make, the handle. So I made my own flag.
Yeah, I like that.
You want to hear the second story?
Yeah.
The second story was I would have been maybe 10 years old, and I was taking ballet lessons, and there was a recital, and for the recital, you needed a special costume. I always had the leotard and the shoes, the proper shoes for the regular lessons, and that they could afford to let me have ballet lessons. So when it came time to have this special costume for the recital, my mother wouldn't buy me this one-time use leotard, which I don't know, might have been $5. I had to dance in my underwear, my white underpants and my white undershirt. I was not in the front row. But I remember that. All these years later, I remember that.
Do you remember that in a fond way? Like you have an appreciation for her thriftiness? Or do you remember that in you were scarred from dancing in your underwear?
Well, probably over the years. I'm sure at first, when it was actually happening, it was not good. But over the years, it's become a fond memory.
Yeah. It's funny how those
things change over time.
Yeah. So I feel like you talk about your mom so much. I know her, but just for those listening's reference, she died before I was born. After my brother was born, but before I was born. So within 2 years of me being born. Very young. She died in her 50s.
60, either 62 or 63.
Sorry, the very young part was right, because
Yes.
I think that's very
Yes.
young. But
Yes.
she died of colon cancer, too young.
Yes.
And go get your colonoscopy.
Yes.
I'm getting one next week for that very reason. But I feel like you talk about her a lot, and I feel like we have very similar views on moderation. So in both of those stories you just shared, one of them, you were at a 4th of July parade, so you were going and doing stuff.
Of course.
Right? So she already took you to go do something cool, and she just wasn't willing to, get that extra thing, but she turned it into a fun art project. And on the leotard, you said it, but it's like you got ballet lessons. You had the stuff. It was just the extra additional costume for a one-time wearing that she was like, this is a little bit, we got to stop at some point. And I have the same value, but what's interesting is lately I find myself giving in more and more with the kids. And I think I'm giving in because I can afford to, right? If I didn't have the money, my values and what I believe in are that there's moderation, right? Of there's only so many things, you want to go to a school dance and it's a Western theme. There's only so many things I'm going to buy you for this one time a costumed event. Same thing with a Halloween costume or something. But I am just finding myself giving in a lot more because I can afford to. And if I couldn't afford to, I think I would put much harsher lines on what I'm trying to instill in the kids, which is some sense of you don't need all this stuff to be happy.
My mother lived through the Depression, so I think the way she handled money was just how she had to handle money. I don't think she had a whole lot of choices she basically got things paid for, and savings was always the first thing. Put your money into savings first, and then what you've got left, you spend on either long-term things or short-term things.
Yeah.
Three pieces.
Okay, what was your first job and what did you learn about money from it? I also want to guess your first job. Was it on the boardwalk?
Well, are we talking about babysitting?
No, your first
a W-2 job.
Yeah, because you babysat, so that was your first job. What else did you do to make money before getting a W-2?
Babysitting.
Okay, just that.
But
so your first W-2 job.
First W-2 job. Okay, I can't remember whether it would have been on the boardwalk, and now I'm confused as to what year we bought the house. So our family, the family I grew up in, was able to afford a summer house, a second house in a beach, Ocean City, New Jersey, beachside resort.
Well, you guys must have had money then.
Well, and my family so we always went to the beach. We went to New York City on the train. We went to Broadway plays. We went to Washington, D.C. probably once a month. We lived in Baltimore, so that was an easy drive. We went to Washington. I know all of the old things in Washington, toured every single one of them many times. Like I said, many trips to New York City on the train. We took road trips, drove, in a station wagon with 4 kids. We went across the country. We saw the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone. And so education was important to my family.
You all of a sudden sound less middle class than when you were in your underwear on a ballerina at the ballerina recital versus I forgot you guys had a house in
the house at the beach.
But also back then, real estate wasn't insane and you could get a house at the beach for a reasonable amount of money.
And the house at the beach, my mother rented out rooms. She took in boarders.
Yeah, to pay for it.
To pay for it. So my first job was either on the boardwalk, and I would have made $1.25 an hour. I worked in a candy store.
George's Candy.
George's
I remember
Candy.
It. Every time we walked by it, she'd be like, that's where I used to work.
Or my other job, and again, I would have been 15. I would have been living in Baltimore, and I went to work for a 5 and 10 cent store called Woolworth's. That's an old-fashioned term.
Yeah, I
Some
remember
people
the name
may
of it.
recognize. So, and I had lots of different jobs there. So that was an old-fashioned version of like a Target.
What did those jobs teach you about money at that time that you can remember?
They taught me to be a good employee. Very, very important to be, just do the best you can, give everything you've got to your employer, be valued. And they taught me to save money.
Okay. But did your mom like sit you down and say
No.
like, now that you just figured it out? Okay. Okay. I'm going to fast forward from how you grew up with money to when you were, 20s, 30s, 40s, my age. But let me ask a bigger question now. Do you worry about money now?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Why do you think that is?
I have enough. I don't spend very much. I live in a very affordable senior living facility. Monthly fees are exactly what Social Security pays me. I have a small annuity from my previous job. I mean, a very small annuity from my previous job that pays my credit card. There's other than gifts. And I don't buy stuff. I give checks for occasions, birthdays, Christmas. I don't buy stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like I have plenty of money. I worry a little bit that if at the end of my life, and I'm not at all afraid of dying, I'm on good terms, I think, with everybody. I worry that if I were to spend 2 or 3 years in needing nursing in a nursing home that costs $15,000 or $20,000 a month, that I would use up your inheritance. So I would rather be there for just a month or two and have some money to leave you and your brother.
Yeah. If only you could just book a stay and be like, yeah, I'd only like to stay here for 1 month. It's like you're booking an Airbnb. I'm good for 30 days and then let's,
I'm very unhappy with the way life is prolonged when there's no quality of life left. That bothers me to no end.
yeah. And to your point, it's incredibly expensive and yeah, different topic for a different day. But I love how you said enough, which is one of my favorite words lately, and just your realization that you had enough. But I'm going to go out from what I know of you, growing up with you. I don't think you always felt like you had enough. Would you agree? When did that change, right? When did you feel like you had enough? And there was a point when you did worry about money, right?
Yes.
And again,
Yes.
I know enough about you to make that statement, but I would love for you to talk about that a little bit.
All right, well then let me set the stage. So previously I talked about my childhood. Now I'm the grown-up. I'm the mother. My husband is Maggie's father, and I have 2 children, Maggie and her brother. This is now the
Which one did you like better?
Well, that's another question. That's
He's
I
not
am
even
so-
listening to this.
I am so proud of both of you. I am just so proud. So Maggie's childhood would have been in the 1980s and the 1990s. So we're now talking about the end of the 20th century. Again, my husband did not finish college. Maggie's father did not finish college. He was a musician, a photographer, an incredibly creative man. He never worked. He always worked for himself. He's always self-employed. So I knew that I had to have a full-time job, that I had to be the one who would make sure the mortgage got paid every month.
And have insurance.
Make sure our family had insurance. Absolutely. And furthermore, when I first met my husband, his finances were just horrible, just absolutely horrible. Somebody said the other day, if he had a dime, he spent $1. Horrible. And I'm the one who had a savings account, and I'm the one who knew that you had to work hard during the summer vacation so you had money to get you through the months that you were at school.
Yeah. And he was older than you also.
A little bit, by 7 or 8 years.
Yeah. I was just saying that in terms of like you being the one that, was more on top of different financial things. You were younger.
Mm-hmm. So again, when my husband went into business for himself, I told him, this is the rule. I said, I am not going to give you spending money, and I am not going to maintain your car. So you're buying your own gas, you're buying your own tires, you're maintaining your car and your pocket money. I will handle everything else.
And you were saying that to give him the freedom to go start his own company.
Yes.
Right. I just want to clarify that because he left at the time he was actually managing hotels, which was
Exactly.
interesting considering I then went and worked in the hotel industry for 15 years of my career. But he was managing hotels, so he had a more reliable, steady income with those jobs. And
Correct.
then he wanted to launch his own photography business and graphic design and a bunch of other things it turned into. And you were saying, I'll float you for, this amount essentially, but you have this much flexibility.
Here's one more little detail you may or may not care about. When he started his own business, he needed to buy a very expensive Hasselblad camera system. I had saved up, I'm pregnant with your brother in 1977. I've saved up $1,500 so I can pay the obstetrician and the hospital bill when I have this baby. And that's the money that I gave your dad just to buy this camera to start his photography business.
Wait, how'd you have the baby then?
Oh, I don't know. And I probably had $4,000 in the bank, and I knew that $1,500 was what I needed to pay medical expenses, and that's the money he needed for his camera.
So going back to a question a couple minutes ago, and I want to get more into how you guys managed finances. What was the point when you started worrying about money in your life?
As a self-employed person, my husband's income was like a roller coaster. It would be high one year and low the other, so up and down, up and down. And money worries were just probably I remember Christmases that we couldn't give you little kids very much. And there was a Christmas that I wanted something that cost $150 and we just didn't have it. We probably had it saved, but I wasn't going to go into savings for this. So the savings was sacred.
So was the point, was it when you had kids? Was it when Dad started working on his own? Were you worried about money even when you met him because you knew he was less good with money and came in with some debt? Like, I'm just kind of curious if you can pinpoint a phase in life when money became a point of stress.
Honestly, I really can't, other than to say maybe it was like cyclical roller coaster. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Your dad and I never argued about money.
So that was my next question, because I wouldn't have thought that, for what it's worth. How did you manage the finances in the relationship, and like what worked well and what didn't, and what caused tension?
What worked well is my husband's business was where he handled his personal money. So he handled all that piece of money, his business. I handled the household money, and he didn't get involved in the household money, and I didn't get involved in his business.
So some amount of separate.
Very much separate.
It's funny. I'm a big fan of separate finances for similar reasons, but I'm not sure that I realized the extent to which those things were kind of separated and, to your point, worked well. So what didn't work well? When was money a source of tension in our family growing up, or in your relationship? And kind of how'd you deal with it?
Right now I can't think of an answer.
Well, maybe it wasn't really then. You mentioned like Christmases were
all I gave you for Christmas was toilet paper and a big box of Tide.
Oh, that was in college.
I know.
Yeah, okay. I was like, wow. I was like, did I want that as a kid? I do remember one year you guys saying like, we might have been older, but like, we're not doing presents, we're doing presents for charity. I don't remember what the name of the organization was. And I remember I might have maybe had an attitude at the time briefly. I don't remember if I did, but I remember like those I think are important lessons, because you were realizing like other people need things way more than we do.
I had forgotten about that, but it was Clark Howard's, I think, something for children, and we made a large contribution to that.
Yeah. I didn't remember it was Clark Howard. That's cool.
One year, so we had where our house was, we had to take down a whole bunch of these, little tall, skinny pine trees that are horrible, worthless. And we spent maybe $3,000, which was a lot of money, taking down a whole bunch of trees. And I think you guys were in college, and there was some teasing about the fact that that's how your Christmas was taking down these trees.
Yeah, love a good tree for Christmas. Okay, so overall, like, you had some separation, but like, were you and Dad generally aligned on how to manage finances, or did you just avoid crossing over into each other's territory?
We did not get along on some other areas, but I don't think that money was ever one of the issues, interestingly enough. He was very, so again, he came into the marriage with not having any money skills at all, was very, liked the fact that I could handle money. And that's one of the things that made me appeal to him. But he was always very, very complimentary of the fact that that I handled the money well, that we had savings, that we could buy cars when we had to, and we didn't trade cars very much, that we had a nice house, that we put the addition on the house. He was always very, very complimentary.
Yeah, that's so interesting because when I asked that question, I assumed there was some tension over money. But to your point, it probably was when, as a kid, you perceived tension in your house over things. And me just thinking, oh, it must have been about money because that's what people, that's what many people have trouble dealing with. What I think is so interesting about what you described, Mom, is that many partners in a relationship have different dynamics of what creates tension when they're not aligned around finances. And you and Dad were coming from very different experiences and places financially. To your point, you were just much more naturally astute at managing it and saving first and things like that. And I think he was pretty good at making it and hustling and doing lots of side gigs and jobs and stuff like that, but probably just spent it very freely and without measuring, his checking. What you had to do back in the day is like watch your checking balance and stuff like that. But what I think is cool and probably worked in y'all's favor is that he trusted and believed in you and let you do it. And there's many other relationships where there's a lot of tension around money because people come in with different values and experiences and expectations around money, and they don't let go of whatever they have to let someone else who might be good at managing take the lead on something.
Well, traditionally, especially the man who traditionally was the breadwinner and the woman who was the stay-at-home person, the man always felt that he was the one to control the money.
Yeah.
But that wasn't in my mother's case. That wasn't in my case. I think it's in my brothers and sisters' cases as well. I think my sisters both are the money managers in their households. More
active. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So let's talk about a little bit about how you raised me and my brother Alex financially. Do you have any memories of things you actively did to teach Alex and I about money and about finances?
Again, you were raised in the 1980s and the 1990s. And in those days, your bank savings account was getting 12, 14% interest. As little kids, 6 years old, 7 years old, you had bank passbooks at the bank. We would go to the local branch bank. You would get up on the step stool so you could be eye to eye with the teller. You would hand over your passbook. You would give them money that you had gotten for your birthday or Christmas. 3 months later, 4 months later, you'd come back and you'd get interest. Here's money that the bank is just giving you. So I taught you to save, I think.
Okay. I remember those passbooks. I remember one of them was Decatur Federal.
Yeah.
Do you still have them?
I don't.
I feel like Alex still has one of his. I've seen it somewhere. What else do you remember anything else about things you proactively did with us?
Vacations on the boardwalk, you would be 6, you were one of 8 cousins. And again, you guys are all stair steps. Every year we had a new cousin born. And we would be on the boardwalk at night and you'd get $1. And how did you want to go spend that $1?
What if we had asked for more? Would you give it to us?
That was adequate to get a snack and a drink and
Yeah.
It was a matter of making choices. And did you want to save any of it? Did you want to bring 50 cents of it home? We also, were taking you on the rides and you were having they're not the kind of vacations that you're taking your girls on now, but I felt like my husband and I gave you and your brother nice vacations. You went to the beach in the summer to be with my family. In the wintertime, you went to Florida to be with your grandparents.
Yeah, I have incredibly fond memories of going to Ocean City, New Jersey every summer. And I was the only child in Atlanta flying to New Jersey for vacation, along with my brother. And we have amazing memories. I mean, even going back as adults and taking our own kids, I was just looking at photos the other day and it's just a very nostalgic place. And to your point, yeah, those vacations cost significantly less than, us taking the kids to Ireland or somewhere. But I have amazing memories from them. Okay, do you remember did you tell Alex and I we had to get jobs?
I don't think so. But I feel like, I mean, you babysat as a child. I think Alex might even have been doing some babysitting.
He might have. Then we both worked at the grocery store in the
Yes,
neighborhood.
yes.
But like you didn't tell us like
No.
you need to go. But did you tell us like you're going to have to pay? I know there were always things that we had to share in the expense of. Like how did you handle our first cars?
Could I answer something else? Could I tell you about college?
Yeah, sure.
So the first year that each one of you were born, I put money in a savings account that 18 years later paid for your first year of college.
Wait, was it a savings account or a CD?
Either, same
I just
thing.
would like to note it was a CD or no, savings bonds.
Savings accounts.
I actually thought it was a CD, but
Well, sometimes you'd have a certain amount of money in a savings account that was getting 12% interest. If they advertised, oh, here's a CD that's going to pay 15
Okay,
or
you move
16,
it.
you'd take a little bit out. You'd
Okay.
go into that for a certain period
so
of
it
time.
might have moved around. But either
Yes.
way, the point is you
Yes.
put some money in when we
Yes.
were okay. Keep
When
going.
the money I put in the year that you were born, in the first year of your life, is the money that 18 years later was enough to pay your tuition at college. And I remember worrying about, and maybe this is something that my husband and I did talk about, worrying about how are we going to pay for 4 years of college for our two children. And my plan was I would pay for the first year. I would figure out how to pay for the second year. I would involve you, my child, in paying for the third year. And maybe the fourth year you were going to pay for. And I'm just so proud that each one of you went and did your master's degrees all by yourselves. You paid for every single bit of your master's
Yeah.
degree and didn't come and ask me for anything.
Well, going back to college real quick, I didn't know we could come back and ask you for money for master's degrees. But going back to college, so the amount of money we had, do you remember the amount of money? I kind of do. I
How
just want to
much?
compare our numbers. Yeah. Do you remember how much money you gave me when that was in that account for me to go off to college with?
Well, there were two pieces to, you're paying tuition, and that's one thing, and then the room and board. Now, you and your brother
No,
both
I'm not
went
talking about
on
that.
the
I'm talking
Hope.
about the college fund, though. The actual, like, what you considered a college fund for us, which wasn't, I say that because it wasn't in a 529, but, like, do you remember that amount of money?
Probably $3,000.
The reason I'm asking that, I always think it's just interesting to, like, try to remember amounts of money.
Here's something that's interesting about college, at least in the past. The price of an average American car and the price of an average American college education always tracked, often tracked.
They don't track anymore.
Maybe not.
Not at all. It depends where you go. I was just doing the math in my head. I was like, I don't think they track. But what was interesting is you said that amount of money was enough to pay for my tuition. It wouldn't have been. It depends where I went, right?
Of
So
course.
I ended up staying at an in-state school, but I almost went to that out-of-state school, and it would have paid for like less than 1 year, which is why I made the last minute decision to stay in state, get the Hope Scholarship, and then I could use that money for room and board and everything else.
This is what I remember about your college, is you applied to 4 places. One was in Ohio, and you got accepted. One was in Auburn, and you got accepted. University of Georgia, and then was the fourth one Georgia Tech?
I think I applied to Georgia Tech too. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah,
all
accepted
4
all
places
of
you
them.
get accepted. And I love the fact that you chose to stay in state because it was the Hope Scholarship
Yeah.
that took care of the tuition, both you and your brother. And all I had to pay at that point was room and board.
Yeah.
We got lucky because I think my husband and I were talking about whether we were going to have to do a second mortgage if you had chosen to go out of state, refinance the
Yeah,
house. to
would
get
you
a little
have?
Probably.
Huh. I wouldn't have thought you would have.
Yeah.
Just based on my memory. I don't even remember that being like an option I'm glad I didn't because I don't think my life would have been any different had I gone to a different college. Okay. This is so interesting. I'm learning new things. Do you have any interesting memories of me or Alex? Let's focus on me because people don't know Alex here, but of us as money with a kid, like how we were with money as a kid.
I don't.
Like you always tell some story one time where I was like asking for money for something, and I always feel like I had really strong cases when I asked you for money for something.
Do you remember when we went to the Piedmont Arts Festival and you bought that really cool chair? And that was not an
The
inexpensive
wooden and
item.
blue chair. I want to say it was
Yes.
like hundreds of
That
dollars.
was not an inexpensive item, but that was your money. So obviously you had savings and you knew you needed to save. So you had extra money when we went to Ocean City in the summer. Just because I was only giving you $1 in the evening on the boardwalk for your treat, you had your own money to go and buy. What were some of the things you bought? Some interesting things in the summers.
I don't remember
Yeah.
any. I mean, like art. type things. Like, I don't know what I bought. I remember that chair very specifically because it was then in my bedroom for many, many years.
Yeah, well, when a 12-year-old buys a piece of furniture, their own piece of furniture, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it stayed there. I went to my room in college. I mean, I think that chair stayed with me for a long time. I'm not actually sure where it went now. I wish I had it back.
You asked earlier if I asked you guys to get jobs.
Yeah.
I think you just saw that, because people had jobs, they had money and they could buy things. And I think you saw that happening in your father's case and in my case. And
yeah, but like when we had cars, you helped us each get a car when we turned 16. I had a slightly nicer car than Alex's, from what I recall.
did you actually have a car at 16? I don't remember
I
that.
did. You gave me your old white Mazda and you bought the identical car in blue. And that was when I was 16. I'm almost positive it was pretty close to when I was 16.
I know when Alex turned 16, because Alex turned... So I've got a boy now who's 16 who can drive, and he's driving you to school, and he's taking care of activities and all of that.
And he had that old Ford Escort.
The tan Ford Escort.
Yeah.
And I moved up to the white car.
That was not a pretty car. I remember it was a nice...
and it was a 4-speed. It was a manual transmission.
Manual. Yeah. He put speakers in it that were worth more than the car itself. But like, did you gave him that car?
Yeah.
And then did he pay for insurance and gas? I feel like I remember you making us pay for it.
You absolutely had to pay for your own gas, and I think you had to give me something towards insurance.
Yeah.
So one time Alex wanted kind of a sporty car, and I can't remember what it was. I don't even remember, if he actually knew one that he was going to buy. But so at one point, we had 4 cars in our family, 4 drivers. Each one of those cars had more than 100,000 miles on it. Thank goodness I had a good, reliable, honest mechanic who would help me, not overcharge me, and would do what was necessary to keep these 4 cars on the road. But at one point, Alex wanted a fancier car, and there was another customer was offering their car for sale. It was a little red 323 Mazda, not a fancy car. It was used, but it was a couple of $1,000s. And I remember buying it and bringing it home and telling Alex, here's a car you can have, or you can figure out how to buy this thing that you want that's going to cost a whole lot more. And he wasn't real happy, but he accepted the little red car.
Yeah.
And then put fancy speakers in it.
Was that in college at that point?
Probably.
Because I kind of remember him driving that car. I always had to ride in the back of the tan Escort. He wouldn't even let me ride up front. I had to get in the back seat because his girlfriend. But even on the way to pick up his girlfriend, I had to ride in the back seat. I have memories of that. I feel like now he would let me ride in the front seat, though. Okay. Is there anything else from our childhood that's worth noting?
I can't think of anything else right this minute.
Okay, let me move to the life advice portion of this interview, if you will. What do you want your grandkids to know about money? Like the next generation, if you had to, give them some seeds of advice.
Yes. Number 1, get a good education. Number 2, get a good job and be a good employee, be valuable to your employer. Number 3, live below your means. So from your very first paycheck, start saving. From your very first paycheck, contribute to your 401k. Let your employer match. Get every dollar that your employer is willing to match. I always worried that Social Security wasn't going to last for my lifetime. I think it is. Now I worry if Social Security is going to last through your lifetime, and I worry if Social Security is even going to be available to the grandchildren. So again, good education, get a good job, live below your means, always have some savings, marry the right person.
Is that a piece of financial advice or
yeah, I think so.
The marry the right person? Is that a financial advice or is that a...
Alex used to have a sign that said 85% of your happiness is based upon marrying the right person.
Yeah. Choose wisely.
Mm-hmm. Use credit wisely. Credit is good. Credit is not bad, but use it wisely. So my husband and I always had 2 credit cards. One was where you put your groceries, your gas tank, your going out to dinner, your new clothes, whatever, your monthly incidental expenses. The other credit card was for if you had to buy a refrigerator or a washer dryer, something that you knew you were not going to pay off in 1 month, you had to carry a little bit of interest on that for just a few months, but at least you weren't paying interest on your incidental, your monthly fees. So 2 credit cards.
That's an interesting approach.
And we had separate credit cards.
If you could go back and redo financially, because otherwise, big question, right? But if you could go back and redo some things financially in your life, is there anything specific that comes to mind?
Actually, no.
Like, did you max out your 401k?
Yes.
You did the company match, not the IRS. You ever did the IRS match? The IRS max?
I don't remember what.
But you put money
I put
in there
as quickly as that was introduced. And I mean, at the beginning, they didn't have it. And the day it became introduced, yes, of course.
So you wouldn't, because you didn't really invest from what I'm aware of. Like, you didn't have money in the stock market.
We did. And we actually, in October of 1987, lost a third of our money.
Did you lose it? It would have come back.
It came back.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But if I had $300,000 the day before, the next day I had $200,000.
Yeah.
And yes, that money came back.
What was that money in, though?
I've been in Schwab. I've been in.
So you were in some sort of mutual funds that you would buy.
The whole alphabet of every Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab.
But that's the
name them.
broker.
Right. I was with every single one of them. I can't remember at
You
what.
sound like you're talking about dating someone. I was with them all. Like,
I truly, absolutely
know.
was.
Yeah.
Was. And I can't remember when that first became, when I went from having just my passbook, I'm pointing to the bank up the street, my passbook accounts with savings. Same place. You have your checking account, you have your savings account, you have your CDs. They're all in the same bank. When I moved from that, when I first got into what investor, and maybe it was advice from my brother or my brother-in-law, the CPA, that we started putting money in the market.
and so, but you were probably buying like a mutual fund of some sort. Okay.
I'm sure that I was a victim of a guy selling a product, of a salesman wanting me to buy this product
he was
because he
making
got the
fees
best
on.
commission. Of
Yeah.
course, yes. So I probably didn't do the best. I didn't have all the knowledge of doing the best as far as my investments, but I came out with more money at the end.
Yeah, and you're not like lying awake at night thinking
No.
like, oh, if I had only had another 100,000, I'd be doing this with my life.
Not at all. Not at all.
If someone asked me this question the other day, so I'm just going to pass it along to you. If I were to give you $10,000 right now, no strings attached, and you had to spend it on something, what would you spend it
Charities.
on? Okay, so there's nothing you want
No.
that you can't afford to buy yourself.
Not at all.
It's a good answer. It's a good position to be in.
I would like to add that for your dad starting out financially a mess at the beginning when we first met, at the end, he was very good about saving, very frugal, very careful, very conscious. So I'm left with a nice amount of money.
Yeah. I have memories of him being a very frugal person, but I don't always remember like the specifics. I remember certain things that were instilled in me, not like someone sitting down and having a conversation with me, but I remember things like we always had skin in the game. So even in that kind of college example you gave, but when I just remember like when we had cars, like I remember having to pay for my own gas, and I remember something about paying for insurance, but like not the
part of it.
Yeah, the specifics. But I remember like being gifted a car, and I don't think I had to pay for any of that car, but it wasn't a super fancy car. It wasn't like, but it was a reliable, like it worked and it got me where I needed to go.
It was safe.
Yeah. And
It was paid for.
Yeah. And it wasn't anything fancy, but like, I don't think most 16-year-olds should be driving anything fancy for a billion different reasons. But I just do have these memories of there always being like some skin in the game and some accountability and agency over us not just being fully handed something, which to me is a huge piece of what has made me much more conscious and like appreciative of money and recognizing just being much more intentional with my money.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
I don't think I have any other questions. Is there anything that you feel like you really wanted to share today that I didn't ask you about?
I can't think of it right now.
Are there any questions that you want to ask me?
No.
This is like a job interview. If you don't have questions ready, it's not a good look, you know? Okay, well, I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Have you enjoyed this?
I have.
Okay. Well, many people once requested you to come on the podcast, like I said, and now you have it, people. Thank you for coming on, Mom. I wanted to do this personally for all the reasons I said at the very beginning, but I also think there's so much that we all learn about money through our upbringing, through the different values that we were directly taught, that we indirectly observed, and that were like you guys maybe never sitting us down and having certain talks with us, but us seeing how you were living your life and the trade-offs, just the idea of, not being overly consumeristic. And I don't know, I think there's just a lot that we all learn from our upbringings, like I said, directly and indirectly. And so I think it's interesting to go back and just think about how we got the way we are about money. And it's the first step in people who are trying to make a change, which I'm not in that case personally, or in that stage right now personally, but for many people, they're trying to make a change about money and they've got some bad habits they're trying to work through. And often I think those do come from the way that they were raised financially. Again, not necessarily directly, but indirectly, what they did or didn't have and what they did or didn't observe. And so I think going back and exploring how you were raised personally is just interesting. And it's a good step on everyone's financial journey. So I'd encourage many of you don't have to record it and put it in a podcast, but go talk to your parents if you have a relationship where you can. And if you don't, spend some time thinking about how you were raised and what that did to you and what scripts and other things that instilled in you that you could work on changing for the better to improve your finances.
I did think of one more thing to comment about.
Go for it.
And this is a reflection on my mother, that the 4 children, I'm the oldest of 4 children, and all 4 of us, I think, are relatively in the same economic position. Again, upper middle class, all of us, each one of us, the sequence was get your education, get your job, choose your life partner. Everybody's still on their first marriage. Choose your life partner, buy a house. Then you have in our case, each one of us had 2 babies. That's a good reflection on my parents, the fact that all 4 of us are pretty much in the same good boat. Did you ever feel among your cousins that you had more, you had less?
No, because I'm not physically close enough to my cousins.
You're weak in Ocean City. Did you ever feel like...
Oh, you mean when I was a kid?
Yes.
Oh, I thought you meant now. And I was
No, not now. Not now at all.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I didn't necessarily think it about my cousins, but I've told you, I think many times, or I've certainly said it on the podcast many times. I think as a kid, I often saw people around me and thought they had so much more than us, right? And I don't think that as an adult now. Like now, I definitely have a more abundance mindset around money, of realizing how good I have it and how much I have. But when I was a kid, you don't have that perspective yet. You're not born with it. It's hard to be born with that. And I frequently, I would look at the car I had and think about some of the cars my friends had, which again weren't like Mercedes, but I remember one of my friends had a Volvo and I thought that was really cool and fancy. But I knew one of my friends went to England when I was a kid. I think they went to Hawaii once, and those weren't we were going to visit family on every vacation. Most of the vacations we were going on,
yes,
we were staying at a family member's house.
Yes.
And yet we were getting on a plane, and that was, I think, a big expense. But so I do remember comparing myself to other kids, not my cousins specifically, because I would see them once a year.
True.
And we were all in vacation mode. And so I don't think I necessarily knew what they did or didn't have as much. But I was definitely comparative. I think all kids are comparative. And I think it's something hopefully we all grow out of over time, in being less comparative and more appreciative of what you have. Because enough. I mean, you said enough. And you said choices, which I like a lot also. You were telling something earlier and you just talked about choices. And I do think we all make choices about how we want to spend our money and how we want to save. And just there's just all these points in your life where we are all making choices, and there often is a better choice in front of us, and it's not always the easiest choice, but it can sometimes be the more fruitful choice, if you will, which I know is one thing we're trying to instill in our kids a lot, and just making better choices financially. So, okay, anything else?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on, Mom.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for listening. I know your time is limited and valuable. We appreciate you spending some of it with us. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a written review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. We truly appreciate it. We always encourage you to share this episode with a friend or family member to encourage ongoing discussions about money. This would be a great one to share with your parents, and maybe it will start your own discussion with them about money and just some of the historical experiences and lessons lessons you were taught. You can also subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have any thoughts or questions, we would love to hear from you, and you can leave a voicemail or text us at 404-981-3370, or you can hit us up on Instagram. Okay, thanks, Mom. Bye.
Goodbye.
We're going round and round and round and round and round.